Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader, and we're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first is the revolutionary cyberpunk adventure game that defined itself by letting the player solve anything however they wanted. 2000's Deus Ex. Yep, you heard right. We're here. It is just me. So, funny story about that. We were going to record on Saturday, but then I didn't have time to do my research on Friday night. And then we had to push it to Sunday because there was no way that I was going to have my research done by Saturday afternoon anyways. Then Peter's schedule got really, really iffy, so we figured, we'll record on Monday, at which point I remembered, I can't record on Monday, I have a family thing. So it just turned into a solo episode. You're stuck with me, and once again it is for a game I have not played. I really know how to pick them. But before we get into that, let's talk about some composer follow-up news. Most of it came from the Game Awards. Look, I'm going to spare you my rant. It sucked. It was bad. It was really bad. It was actually kind of insulting in a lot of ways. Music and score got given out off stage again in a rapid fire thing. And worst of all, or even worse than that, I guess I should say, Best Indie Game also got given out in a rapid fire segment off stage. And that sucks. That's awful. And people doing the, putting all the time stuff together, so little of that show was spent on the actual awards for the Game Awards. And just, it was a joke. It was awful. It was the worst I've seen in a very long time. And I won't get any further into it. You can check my Twitter if you want to see what I really, really, really felt. But there was some good news in there, I guess. A lot of it was just sort of really generic announcements. A bunch of space shooters that just looked exactly the same. But we did get an announcement of Thrasher, which is a sequel to Thumper, as well as World of Goo 2, which, fun fact, as is tradition, it was announced and shown off while I was not at my computer. I left for 5 minutes to go pick up dinner, and when I got back, World of Goo 2 had been announced. It always happens that way. And in non-Game Awards news, the Pokemon Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet official soundtrack releases are launching in Japan on Pokemon Day 2024, that's February 27th. There is currently no word on an international release. But look forward to that international release being on Apple Music and nothing else. Okay, so I have a good amount to talk about and not a lot of time to talk about it. So let's just jump in and get started. Deus Ex was originally released for Windows on June 23rd, 2000 in the United States, and then August 4th, 2000 in the UK. There was a Mac release on July 13th, 2000, and then later on a PS2 version would come out on March 26th, 2002 in North America, and June 7th, 2002 in Europe. It was developed by Ion Storm Austin and published by Eidos Interactive. The wiki just lists it as being developed by Ion Storm, but it was specifically an offshoot studio in Austin that made it. It is described by its developers as a genre mashup of action RPG, immersive sim, FPS, and stealth games. I'm not actually sure we have talked about an immersive sim on this show before. If we have, it is not coming to mind. I guess, would Pathologic technically be one, I guess? I don't know. I don't know. The game is played from a first-person perspective, and on the surface, it really plays like a lot of other games that are told from that perspective in terms of base look and feel. And The thing is, though, that Deus Ex set itself apart, especially from other games at the time, by having an emphasis on player choice and the act of giving the player several different methods of circumventing obstacles. And this meant that your only option was not to go guns blazing, which is usually my strategy, but you can also sneak, which I'm bad at, or talk your way through problems. And you can also just, apparently there's like an item that you can just attach to walk out of the game world. So that's neat. It was one of those. And this is where the RPG elements come in, though. The player is able to put skill points into things like stealth or combat ability, which can change how you're going to approach problems a lot of the time. Player can also customize their weapons using various mods, or you can even customize your character by adding various augmentations that grant them superhuman powers. And there's also a big emphasis on talking to NPCs, with their actions changing based on how you interact with them during these conversations, or I assume how you act even outside of the conversation. I'm going to assume if you shoot someone, the person standing next to them is not really going to be in a hurry to have a conversation with you. This is just an assumption, though. And hearing this, some of you might be thinking, like, this just sounds like I played a billion. Technically, everything I just described describes Skyrim, which there are people listening, I'm sure, that would actually stab me for making that comparison, but it's not wrong. I'm just saying. That being said, Deus Ex is important because it was the first game to do all that together, basically. There was no other game like Deus Ex when Deus Ex came out, which made it a revolutionary title. It's a very, very important title in a lot of genres and is still, like, today held up as one of the best games ever made. In Deus Ex, you play as J.C. Denton, an agent of UNATCO, which I'm going to assume is said UNATCO. And that stands for the United Nations Anti-Terrorist Coalition, which was founded in response to the rise of several terrorist organizations around the world as a result of several social, economic, and just plain bad issues currently plaguing it. One of the worst of these issues is a global and lethal pandemic, known as the Great Death, for which there is a vaccine, but it is in short supply and largely has been given only to the upper class. Denton is one of UNATCO's first agents to be physically augmented with advanced nanotechnology, though he's not the only. To start out, Denton is sent on missions to track down stolen shipments of the vaccine, which is known as ambrosia, and these are currently in the possession of the National Secessionist Forces, a terrorist group that is based in America. And this mission leads to a domino effect of conspiracies, betrayals, and I think I've gotten the gist in there. This is one of those games where, like, even if you go look up, like, the first paragraph of the plot summary on Wikipedia, like, there's a lot to it, and there's only so well I can do having not played it myself, so I hope I at least gave the gist. And I guess this is where we will jump into what are my experiences with Deus Ex. Like I said, I've never played it. I don't know. Immersive sims aren't really my thing, I don't think. I am somebody that tends to prefer, not always, but I tend to prefer my experiences be a little bit more on rails than an immersive sim is going to provide for me. That being said, I mean, I have played both Dishonored games, and those I believe are considered immersive sims. And I did enjoy those, but really have not touched anything else in the genre, honestly. They don't seem to be a very attractive genre for me, I guess is how I will put it. That being said, I have heard of the original Deus Ex, and we've talked about a Deus Ex game in the past, being Deus Ex Human Revolution. We talked about that back in Original Soundchat episode 64. That is so long. That is almost 200 episodes ago. Wow. And I'm well aware of like how influential Deus Ex is in general. And like I said, I regularly see it brought up on lists of like the best games ever made, which is telling, I think, considering this game came out literally over 23 years ago. That's a majority of my life ago. So, let's get into the history of Deus Ex, and I want to give a big shout out, first of all, to GDC. GDC does a lot of things wrong. Their pricing for attendance, for example. But one thing they do right is that they have a big vault of old presentations that people have given. And one type of presentation that they like to do is they like to bring in developers to talk about classic games that were made a while ago. And one of these was Warren Spector. Kids today might know him as the creator of Epic Mickey. And Warren Spector did a post-mortem on Deus Ex about 6 or 7 years ago, somewhere around there. And that whole presentation is on YouTube. And I highly recommend it. I am not going to talk about everything he talked about in that, because he not only talks about kind of the history of how Deus Ex came to be and why certain things are the way they are, but he also gets into a lot of like just general game design philosophy and stuff like that, and his feelings on like how to approach projects. And I think it's really, really interesting. And definitely you should check that out. And also just check out the like postmortems that they've done for like retro games in general. There's one on Doom that John Romero does that I think is really, really interesting. There's one on Diablo that I've never watched, but I should. Like, they're extremely interesting to watch, and they're really good for putting on in the background. I highly recommend them. That being said, that's where pretty much almost all of this information comes from, because I kind of figured, like, there's no better source to get info about a game than the director talking about the experience of making it. So, Spector says one of the most important aspects and goals for him and the team was they wanted to have this idea of shared authorship. The way that Spector describes it is that he, in the late 70s, played a D&D game with, I forget the person's name, but they were apparently a very influential figure in the cyberpunk community. And he had such a good experience in this D&D game where it felt like not only was the dungeon master like telling the story, but the players were meaningfully contributing to it and telling it alongside him. And it felt like just this collaborative experience. And that's kind of what he wanted to recreate with Deus Ex. They didn't want it to feel like they were telling you a story. They wanted to feel like you and the developers were telling a story together. And to that end, a very large focus was the idea that players could approach goals in any way they wanted, and those choices should make a meaningful impact on how the story plays out. He says, quote, "I wanted your choices to say more about you, the player, the human with your hands on the keyboard and mouse or controller. I wanted the choices to say more about you than they said about your in-game avatar." The first concept for Deus Ex actually came in the form of a game concept called Troubleshooter that only really existed in Warren Spector's head. And this was in 1994. And that game was going to take place in the real world in 1995, where you played as, and this is the best name for a protagonist ever, Jake Shooter. The concept was apparently very noir, like hard-boiled private investigator, etc., etc. So not super close to what it would become later. But when Spector approached like his workplace, which was at the time the studio Origin, which were the developers of Ultima, neither they nor their owners at EA were really interested in the idea, so they turned it down. And so Spector just sort of dropped it for a while, and later on, he had moved to the studio Looking Glass, where he would do work on Thief, which is one of the most influential stealth games of all time. And he recounts an experience where he was stuck on a level. He could not sneak through it to save his life. He kept getting caught and then killed by the guards. And he could not do it. So he asked the team to make him strong enough to just fight his way through. And they said no. Because, as they explained, if they made the player strong enough to fight through these encounters, they would never sneak. And it was Thief. The game was about sneaking. And Spectre does say that he agrees that this was probably the right call for Thief in general, but he also says that this kind of put this idea in his head that he wanted to make a game where you did have that option. You could fight or you could sneak. And so Looking Glass eventually went out of business, and Spectre was approached by none other than John Romero. And John Romero offered him the opportunity to, quote, make the game of his dreams at Ion Storm. So in 1997, he brought back the concept for Troubleshooter, but it began evolving into the game that would become Deus Ex. And one of the first things that would go away from the original concept was the idea that the game would take place in the real world. They realized that this was not feasible. The technology at the time could not recreate the real world. There was no way that was ever going to happen. And he mentions maybe with today's technology, I think we've kind of proven that you can kind of do it with today's technology. I don't know. So they threw the concept of real world present day out of the window and instead turned to the future, the far future. Well, I guess sort of far future. Would 50 years be far future? I guess that is the lifespan of some people. And while they were trying to figure out how to put this together, they eventually settled on the concepts of cyberpunk and were heavily inspired by films like Blade Runner, which, yeah, that checks out. A lot of themes in the game were heavily inspired by things that were major topics and trends in the news at the time. There was a rise in acts of terrorism. Remember, this was pre-9/11. So, what a world that was. Yeah, kids, there was a time that existed before that. But also, the military was kind of starting attempts at, like, building exoskeletons and stuff for soldiers, which he showed a picture of it in his presentation, and it kind of looked like that scene from Iron Man 2. Like, it generally just did. But there was also the idea of AI and the singularity. That sounds familiar. Huh. As well as interest in nanotechnology that was rising at the time as well. And the biggest theme, though, that they pulled from was the rise of conspiracy theories, which a lot of which were used as a basis for the world and premise of the game. Deus Ex is a game that takes place in a world where all of the conspiracy theories are real and true, which probably would not fly today in the form that it is in, especially if a pandemic is part of the plot. But I don't know. Who knows? You couldn't make Blazing Saddles today. One quote that I really, really liked from Spectre about this was, "The world of Deus Ex was being built around us. We didn't have to make anything up. It was great." Sure. And one thing that he kept saying, a phrase he kept saying during his talk, was roll, not roll, which was ROLE, not ROLL, which he explained as they wanted to let the player fill a role in the world, a meaningful role in the world of the game, instead of like having everything revolve around dice rolls. And that was basically it. I don't understand how that makes sense when you're making an RPG, but I'm not Warren Spector, so I can't really say anything against him. And one part, actually, that I'd seen from this postmortem, and I had forgotten about it until it came up in the presentation, they had like a list of commandments, basically, is what Warren Spector calls them. And it was like 7 or something. I don't remember how many. I don't think it was 10. But the one that I had heard of was, quote, if there's something cool, don't even think about letting an NPC do it. Players do the cool stuff. NPCs watch the players do the cool stuff. Which, I can respect that. That is a very good sort of mindset to have. I want to do the cool thing. Don't let them do the cool thing. And some games haven't grasped that even today. And by the time they hit pre-production, they had more than 200 characters that they had created, and this was before a story had even been written. Because, as Spector says, they figured they could just write a story around these characters. And he admits, this was a mistake. Also, by the time they hit pre-production, they already had 500 pages of documentation, which Spector says nobody read. And it was later cut down to around 270, which Spector says also nobody read. One fun fact, though, I think I knew this ahead of time, but I don't know where I would have known it from. When making the New York City skyline in Deus Ex, an artist accidentally forgot to include the World Trade Center. So do with that information what you will. That's kind of eerie and weird, but alright. Now, according to Spector, the game was technically done in September of 1999, but they really were not happy with the product quite yet. They didn't really want it to ship yet. They felt they still had work to do on it, but it was feature complete and it could be played, etc., etc. And so Eidos actually agreed to give them more time to work on the game. Can you imagine a studio asking for more time and the publisher saying yes? What a fantasy world 1999 was. And as the game was coming out, like right before the game shipped, another quote that I really, really liked from Warren Spector, and this is actually, I think, the last piece of information I have from the post-mortem. He tells an anecdote where he, apparently put his head down on his desk in stress and said, quote, if people get that you can fight, sneak, or talk, we're going to rule the world. If people compare our combat to Half-Life, we're dead. If people compare our sneaking to Thief, we're dead. And if people compare our role-playing elements to Baldur's Gate, we're dead. And he didn't say that in a disparaging way, like Half-Life and stuff, Half-Life and Thief, and all the games that were listed there were actually listed as inspirations for Deus Ex. Like Valve was heavily listed as one of the contributing factors to the concept. But the idea that they were trying to make a game that had never been made before, and I can definitely see the logic in the idea that if the reviews come out and they're all comparing you to other games, then you didn't succeed. I can see the logic in that. And when he starts wrapping up the presentation and he asks how things turned out, he says, quote, we didn't die, so that tells you something. And in fact, they did not die. The game reviewed very well upon release, a 90 on Metacritic. It was praised for its atmosphere and, more than anything, its freedom of choice, which was what they were aiming for. So, hey, good on ya. Some of the criticisms, however, were given to the game's graphics and animations, which were apparently kind of primitive even at the time, as well as at least one reviewer heavily criticizing the hacking and lockpicking mechanics for being what he referred to as non-interactive. One funny criticism I noticed is that save files were too big. On average, according to one reviewer, a save file would be roughly 15 megabytes, with the reviewer's final playthrough having amassed 250 megabytes of save data by the end. And you might be hearing those numbers and being like, that's nothing. I'm pretty sure save files for games today are maybe bigger than that. You're probably right, But you gotta remember that in 2000, according to a Google search at the very least, the average size of a hard drive was around 10 gigs. And that 250 megabytes was in addition to however big the game was, which I'm going to assume not small for the time. Deus Ex won the Excellence in Game Design and the Game Innovation Spotlight Award while being nominated for Game of the Year at the very first Game Developers' Choice Awards, which had actually lost Game of the Year to The Sims, so hell of a year. At AIAS, it won Computer Innovation and PC Action Adventure, while being nominated for Game of the Year, which it lost to Diablo 2, PC Game of the Year, PC Role-Playing, and Sound Design. And it also won PC Game of the Year at that year's BAFTAs. And the game has kind of become a cult classic since its launch. It did not sell great when it came out, but it built a very dedicated fan base and a very sizable modding scene that I believe is still going today. So it has fervent supporters and lovers. And by 2009, Deus Ex had sold over 1 million copies, but it had a sequel called Deus Ex Invisible War, which released in 2003, and as far as I can tell, it's not as well regarded, but, and this was confusing to me, I have seen so many people talk about this game as if it is terrible for years. And then I look up like reviews and what people like think of it, and it's not unfavorable. I don't know. It reviewed well at launch, and apparently by 2009 it had outsold the original Deus Ex, so I don't know. I've been under the impression that game is bad for years. And then the series just sort of died for almost a decade. It would be revived with Deus Ex Human Revolution in 2011, which takes place 25 years before the original Deus Ex. A mobile game would come out called The Fall in 2013, followed by Mankind Divided in 2016. Jason Schreier claims that as of November 2022, Eidos Montreal is in the early stages of development on a new game, but this has to be mentioned alongside the fact that Deus Ex and Eidos were one of the many, many things that Square Enix sold to Embracer Group in 2022. And things are going great over there right now. Anyways, let's talk about our composer for the week. We are going to talk about Alexander Brandon. Brandon was born September 29th, 1974, started composing at 14 as a result of getting an ad-lib music synthesizer card for Christmas. It specifies saying card. I don't know if that's different or how it's different from a synthesizer. I have no idea. He's gone by several different names in his career, including Siren, Chromatic Dragon, and Sandman. And he is credited for having started and built the audio departments of several game studios. Just a couple that were listed were Ion Storm Austin, obviously, Midway, and Obsidian. And he founded his own audio production studio in 2010 with the name Funky Rustic, which is based in Texas, which as far as I can tell, that is where he is now. He also does voice acting. He's apparently a small part in Invisible War. He plays a couple NPCs in Skyrim. And the one that I found the most interesting is multiple voices in DC Universe Online, including the voice of Black Adam, Zod, and Cyborg. And in terms of his discography, he did the music for Jazz Jackrabbit 2, Unreal, Unreal Tournament, Deus Ex, Unreal 2, The Awakening, Battlestar Galactica, Deus Ex Invisible War, Bejeweled 3, which that was surprising, Deus Ex Human Revolution, and Dust: An Elysian Tale. Though not as a composer, he is also credited with work on Thief Deadly Shadows, Rampage Total Destruction, Neverwinter Nights 2, Mask of the Betrayer and Storm of Zahir, Alpha Protocol, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Leisure Suit Larry, Reloaded, Aliens Colonial Marines, Wasteland 2, and, weirdly enough, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Yeah, I don't know either. So as I said, the soundtrack was composed obviously by Alexander Brandon, but also Dan Gardape and Michiel van den Bos. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sorry. And while we won't really get much of a demonstration of it in our music samples for today, I feel it is important to say that the music in Areas is dynamic. It has variations that it can switch between based on what the player is doing, whether they're exploring, or in a conversation, or engaging in combat. And dynamic soundtracks are just cool, but they continue to be very difficult to show off in 30-second samples. Now let's get to those 5 critical tracks, shall we? First of all, I want to do a shout out to our friend DQP, who not only is the one who suggested that we cover this game, but also helped me find this critical 5, because when I went to look up the soundtrack of Deus Ex, the best resource I could find was a 5-hour video. And that's a lot of time commitment to put towards figuring out 5 tracks for one podcast episode. So I went to them and I asked, look, are there any standouts? What would you suggest? And they gave me a pretty good list of stuff, including 2 songs, one of which I knew, I think, to be iconic, and the other of which that was described as iconic I had never heard before, but I'm going to take their word for it because I assume they are correct. They would know better than I would. But let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to start with critical track number 1. This is Main Title. So I know for a fact I have heard this before. Where that would be, I have no idea where that would have been. I mean, I know where I would have heard it most recently. H-Bomber Guy, who is a big topic currently in the realm of YouTube and social media, he actually did a video about human revolution and its relationship to the original Deus Ex a long time, like a couple years ago. And it's very good, by the way. You should go watch that video if you haven't. And this song, I believe, probably shows up in that video at some point. But I'm pretty sure I heard it before that. And I'm not sure where that would have been. This is one of the songs that was described to me as being an iconic piece of music from this game. And I mean, the main theme, obviously, that's probably going to make it onto the iconic list, the iconic stage. It's a very good song. I like how it has like this interesting little like dramatic march to it. Almost. It's very memorable and still manages to bring across that sort of futuristic feeling to it as well. It honestly sounds pretty good for midis in the year 2000. Not gonna lie. I'm pretty alright with this. Following that, critical track number 2, this is UNATCO. Now, this was another one that was described to me as being iconic, and I really dig this song a lot. I really dig the tone that it's putting down. It feels, again, very futuristic, but also has like this air of... This is going to sound like a weird description. It feels covert? Sure, let's go with that. It feels like an espionage song. I could see this being like a main menu song, which it's not, obviously. This is the music that plays in the UNATCO headquarters, as far as I am aware. And I don't know. I think this is one of my favorites of the tracks that were brought to my attention. It's just the tone of it and everything. It feels really cool to listen to. I like the atmosphere that it's bringing to the table. It's good. Critical track number 3. This was actually one that DQP brought up and mentioned that it was one of their personal favorites in the game, and I enjoy it quite a bit as well. This is Duclair Chateau. So this one still has the sort of mysterious ambient feel to it for the most part, but it's a different kind than UNATCO, I feel like. Chateau makes me think it's like a rich home place thing? I do not know. I have not played Deus Ex, so I cannot give you an exact place where it plays, but it definitely feels like... I don't know what makes it feel fancy. Maybe it's just the fact that I know it's called Chateau. I don't know. But it feels kind of fancy. But that being said, it also feels very sneaky. That's the thing that separates this from UNATCO. It feels like stealth, but music now, and very tense in that way. And yeah, I really like this one as well. Sometimes I talk about games I have not played, and I get worried that I am not covering the music well. Whatever. Critical track number 4. This was one that was brought up to me as playing after a sort of spoiler event thing where you return to New York City and things have kind of changed. So this is critical track number 4, New York City Streets 2, Ambient. Now, I do not know what this spoiler event is that changes things, and because, DKP didn't tell me, and even if they had told me, I would not be telling you. So, but I just really dig this song because I think we have a fundamental disagreement as to what ambient means, but I will forgive it because this feels really good. That being said, there is an instrument in there. I don't know. I think it's supposed to be like a guitar, but sort of processed. And all I hear is Sly Cooper. It just sounds like a Sly Cooper. Like, the song itself does not sound like something out of Sly Cooper. Sly Cooper's a lot more like jazzy and stuff like that. But something about that one instrument, that's the only place my mind goes. And it does kind of sound like an area that is dealing with the aftermath of something big happening. So while I might not know what that big is, this song definitely brings the point across very well. And the final of the Critical 5, we're actually going to talk about one of the combat songs, because this is the one that was suggested to me. This is Enemy Within Combat. Now, this one's title gives me even fewer context clues as to where this could play than all the others, obviously. But, hey, this song sounds rad. This is definitely a very close second for me, personally. I really like the pace. It definitely gives a combat feeling to it. I don't know how fast-paced combat is in Deus Ex, But considering it was built like on Unreal Tournament, like on top of Unreal Tournament, there's a chance that it was quite quick. But I would not personally know. But this definitely at least would make it feel fast-paced and frantic and tense. I think that this one absolutely holds up from the year 2000. Again, this is another like moment of these are really good midis for 2000. I'm kind of really impressed at that. It's just a cool song. I really, really dig this song a lot. And then for tracks on the cutting room floor, this first one, DQB mentioned that they would have probably put it in the Critical 5, but I don't know what I would have replaced because I really like all 5 songs in the Critical 5. And this one is also really good, to be fair, and that is The Synapse, Hong Kong Streets. The only real context that was given to me about this song is that Hong Kong in this game did not age well in terms of how characters are portrayed in regards to accents and things like that, which is unfortunate. Year 2000, man. The year 2000. But I really, really dig this song because it, first of all, it continues to prove my theory that just Asian instruments in general, like instruments that originated in Southeast Asia, they just work in MIDI form. MIDIs of them always sound good. I don't know how, but this song is a very good like example of that. You can hear some of the more Asian instrumentation in there to give this a different flair than the New York City streets music. And I really, really appreciate that. And I don't know, this song's just really, really cool. I really dig it. And it would have gone on the Critical 5, but I don't know what I would have replaced. And the other track on the cutting room floor, this is VersaLife Ambient. Context I was given to this one is that it is during a part where you are going through a very sanitized capitalist corporation environment, just a really, really corporate with a capital C location. And I was told this song slaps too hard to be for that. This one maybe fits the ambient tag a little bit more, but we still have some disagreements about what the word ambient means. I assume that when it's in these titles, it's specifically just talking about, like, this is the music that plays when you're not in a conversation or in combat. And I honestly can't think of anything else, any better word for it, I guess? I don't know. I would just give it the regular name. Yeah. But this is a really, really cool song, and to hear that it plays in super corporate world is really weird. I'm imagining sneaking through cubicles to this song. I don't know how accurate that is, but at least it would make sneaking through cubicles seem cool. And that is gonna do it for this episode of Original Soundchat. I hope I was able to not sound like a complete moron while I was talking about this highly influential game that I have not played. But, you know, I do very much recommend that people go look up that Postmortem by Warren Spector. It's very easy to find. If you just search Deus Ex GDC, you'll probably find it pretty fast. It's about 45 minutes long, and it's a very good talk. A lot of those, like, retro postmortems, again, are fantastic. And I highly recommend all of them. They're my favorite kind of talk that happens at GDCs, to be perfectly honest. Anyways, now that you're done listening to this show and I'm done making a fool of myself, if you want to find us on Twitter, you can find me at StringPixel. You can find my co-host Peter over at Pete Speakeasy. You can also find the video version of this podcast on Peter's channel. That's Rhymes with Asia, as well as the listenable version, the MP3 version, the RSS feed. You can find that at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where you'll find the RSS feed. And you can also just find the show on podcatchers, whatever one you use, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts for as long as it continues to exist, which I assume will be like 3 days. I don't know. And then YouTube Music will be replaced within 2024. And Spotify, we're also there. And not only are we on Spotify with the podcast feed, but we also have a giant playlist, which I'm looking forward to counting down the amount of hours of music in that playlist once we get to the anniversary episode next year, which is that's our fifth anniversary. How? Anyways, the point is, when we talk about a song on this show, we add it to the playlist if it is available on Spotify. Unfortunately, Deus Ex is not available on Spotify, which is kind of surprising to me, but also not super surprising to me at the same time. And then when you're done with that, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. And there you can send us feedback, you can send us suggestions, you can tell me how I am a fool and covered this game incorrectly and throw eggs at my face as I rightly deserve. Then you can do that all on Twitter, which means it'll just be another day on Twitter. Anyways, next week, hopefully it'll be both of us back, sitting down for our last normal episode of the year. We're not moving as quick as we usually do, but we are currently in the process of figuring out the best of 2023, because there's a lot of stuff to dig through, and we're going to get through it, and it's going to be a really damn good episode. But before that, next week, I will be talking about Isaac Shankler, while Peter will be talking about Andrew John Hosier Byrne. And now, it's time to play us out with a fan remix, the way we usually do. That's what we try to do at the end of every show and between segments. I'm saying that as if people haven't listened to 250 episodes of this show before now. I found a couple of different... Obviously, the song that was remixed the most was the main theme. That just makes sense. There's no other song it would have been, I'm pretty sure. But I found a good amount of covers of that song. Almost used a guitar cover, but I ended up going with the most me option, which was a piano cover by YouTuber RigorMortis999. And yeah, it's just a piano rendition, and you know how I feel about piano renditions of music. So, till next time, thank you for listening. That'll do it for Original Sound Chat. Take care.